Hi everyone, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and today something a little bit different. Typically what I've done is gone over some of my own games and sometimes answered some of your questions. Today I was going to look at a couple of games that were played by some locals here where I am. Played in a couple of, one was played in a club tournament, one was played in the U.S. Amateur Team North event. And both of these games actually had some very interesting moments, and I think interesting both from the standpoint of, in one case, maybe revealing some errors that might be more typical among club players. But also, I think the second game, if we have time to get to it today, will be of interest to, I think, an even wider range of players. There's quite a lot that I learned from that really took me by surprise even. So we'll see how far we get. I don't want to make the show too long because, I want to be kind to people's attention spans, if nothing else. So let's go ahead and start with this one. And this was played, I don't want to say the players' names. I'll keep the innocent or the guilty, at least, from any kind of embarrassment here or other opprobrium. So in any case, White is a B player, a good solid B player, about 1700, and White is around 1850 player. Now, in this position, it's Black's move, and he's up a pawn, and I guess I can flip the board around. Doesn't really matter. I'll leave it the way it is here for now. So Black's up a pawn. I think he should win this game. The problem is he was a bit short of time, so he didn't play as accurately as he could have. But I think even the way in which he played wasn't maybe so much as a result of time pressure. Well, I think a little bit, definitely, but to some extent, it revealed, in part, a lack of knowledge, but also, I think, a very interesting and quite typical problem that a lot of club players have, and maybe everyone has it, but I think I notice it more, certainly, at the club level. So what I thought I would do is just go through the moves of the game itself a little bit slowly, but without explaining anything, and then, as I'm doing it, I'd like you to try to figure out, well, what seems wrong, what seems right. So you'll see that by the end of this, White is in fact even slightly better, but a little bit of rating fear, and also perhaps just not really taking seriously that he could have anything, which is also a common psychological phenomenon. But by the end, White has the better half of the draw. In fact, Black has to play accurately to draw it. So what we'll do is we'll just kind of cursor through this one move at a time, and I'd like you to try to figure out, either as it's going or kind of after it's already happened, what it is that Black should have done differently. And even what it is that Black did wrong, if you can try to figure it out from a kind of motives standpoint. Okay, so here we go. So Black played knight to e5. And I think this is, at least the idea of moving the knight is certainly right. I mean, probably don't want to allow bishop takes c6. And certainly we don't want to have to bother calculating it. There's no reason to do that. Okay, so moving on. White defends the threat of knight to d3 check with bishop to e4. c5, f4, kicking the knight, knight to c4, b3, again driving the knight back, knight to d6, so White keeps his bishop centralized with bishop to d5, Black plays b5, so pushing his majority along, seems to make sense, king to d2, centralizing the king, king c7, likewise, king c3, king to b6, g4, b4 check, king to d3, king to b5, h4, okay, Black plays a5, White pushes, g5, h takes g5, f takes g5, now White threatens h5 and h6, so g6, king c2, Black played c4, pushing his majority, he takes c4 check, and here Black didn't want to allow bishop takes f7, so he plays king to c5, king to b3, king to d4, and the draw was agreed in this position. And objectively it is a draw, though perhaps White can maybe push a little bit. Okay, well, hopefully you, and of course you could have stopped the recording at any point too when we were replaying it, but hopefully you have some ideas about what maybe Black did wrong. I think there's probably one culprit that I hope at least jumped out at everybody, and I think you'll be right if you pick that one. But there's also, I think, a second and maybe more subtle problem of blacks. So again, just kind of leaving things at the most abstract level, we'll see this second problem as well. And we'll see it first, actually, if we go back to this original spot. Now, actually, I'll come back. Well, okay, so knight to e5. I think there are other moves that might be even better than this, but okay, this doesn't hurt anything. Bishop to e4, c5, f4, knight c4, b3, knight to d6, bishop to d5. And here I think black's problem was something like this. He didn't want to push the f-pawn for some reason. Now, maybe he felt that if he pushed it to f6, then squares like f5, g6, e6, and so on would be really weak. Well, I mean, f5 is, okay, that isn't affected by playing f6, but that once a white king gets to f5, for instance, then e6 and g6 are problem squares. So, okay, he doesn't want to push that pawn. But then if he doesn't want to push this pawn, well, then this knight has to stay here on d6. But, once again, if we go through this kind of house that Jack built problem, if the knight has to stay on d6, well, then black's poor king, whoops, let me try this. There we go. Black's poor king can't really centralize. So it would be a lot better for black to put his king on d6, and that would involve moving the knight, and that would involve moving the pawn. So, unfortunately, black has kind of tied himself up in knots and really constrained himself pretty severely. I mean, for one thing, by having the knight on d6, it means white gets to keep the bishop on d5 forever, where it's just magnificent. So, black has already kind of put himself in a bit of a bind. He's tied one of his hands behind his back, playing in this way. And to just win while leaving the knight on d6 and the pawn on f7 is going to be extremely difficult if it's possible at all. And I don't think it is possible. I think he has to move those guys to make something happen. Okay, so that I think is one problem. And this is, I believe, a really, really common problem among club players. The place where I think it shows up the most is in the openings. So let's say a certain piece is developed on a certain square. Now, if that piece weren't on that square, there can be situations where a good club player will realize, oh, of course, I should do X, Y, and Z. But because that piece is on that square, where it interferes with X, Y, and Z, they don't bother to move it out of the way. They think, okay, that piece is developed, it's doing its job, and then they start, again, trying to justify the pieces where they are, rather than thinking, what is it that I need to do? And if that involves moving an already developed piece somewhere else, doing it. So always be aware of that. I mean, if there's a certain, when you're thinking about a plan and a position, so you've gotten, let's say you're in an opening, you finished all of your theory, or you're maybe a few moves out of theory, and you're trying to figure out, okay, what's the plan now? Try to think a little bit more globally. So you don't necessarily have to justify the pieces where they are, but think, okay, what kinds of things should I be doing? What makes the best sense out of this pawn structure? What makes the best sense of my pieces globally? Or what makes the most sense given certain weaknesses that my opponent has? So if you take that broader perspective and think, okay, well, gee, in this position I should try to do this. Okay, but that piece is in the way. Well, move the piece. So that might be the thing to do here. And so likewise here, I mean, okay, black should centralize his king. That would make good sense. And all right, that involves moving the knight. Well, moving the knight involves moving the f-pawn. So, okay, you move the f-pawn. And you calculate, you make sure that white's king can't rush into f5 and go to g6 or e6 and kill your queen side. And in fact, it's quite easy to do that, to prevent that from happening. So black could play something like knight to b5, knight to d4, and then f5 is off limits. Right? So there's a bunch of ways to do it. Or you could play knight e8, knight c7, though that would get in the way of the king. But you can again do the timing, count out the tempi, and see if it can happen. Another thing is that black could simply play g6 in some cases. Now you got to be careful about that. Whenever you're putting more pawns on light squares, bad things can happen. But the point is just that okay, if there's certain things you want to do, and you see, okay, if I do it, there's a little bit of risk. Well, you want to check and make sure and see. Okay, if your plan is a really, really good plan, then if there are some things you're concerned about, it's worth taking a little time to calculate and make sure, and to see, rather, if you can take care of those problems. And here, if black can, then he ought to. Okay. And another idea here, too, would be knight c8, knight e7. Again, after moving the f-pawn. Okay, so we'll come back to this. But let's go forward a bit more and look at the second big mistake in the game. Okay, so again, see black's playing to justify the position of the knight, which is played to justify the position of the pawn. So king b6, g4, b4 check, king d3, king b5, h4, a5, g5. Okay, so here black plays h takes g5, and this is just really, really bad. Because after f takes g5, okay, now he's got to play g6, otherwise he loses. But now, I mean, his position is very, very fragile. I mean, now it's not a matter of whether he would like to move the knight and first move the f-pawn. He just can't anymore. So here he's got real problems. And, okay, he's not losing. He could play king b6, b5, b6, b5 forever, maybe. Okay, put the king on c7, so that way if king e3, king f4, king e5. Well, even there, maybe he does have to still be careful, not let white's king get into f6. So already this position is getting a little bit out of control, and this is just a disaster here for black. So in the game, king c2, c4 takes here, king b3. And again, here white should not have chickened out. So king d4 and black offered a draw. White should have taken some time here and realized that he's in no danger whatsoever. So you might want to try to work this out here. Okay, white plays king to a4, and now figure out how black draws this game. So he's got to be really careful. I mean, it's very easy for black to just lose in this position. Okay, well, I'll assume you've done your little homework here. Okay, first of all, let's see what happens if black tries to go counterattacking with knight to f5. Well, here, bishop takes f7, knight takes h4, and now not king takes a5, but king to b5. And the c-pawn runs. And black can't stop it, and also keep everything under control, on the king side. So this is a loser. And it's also important to notice. Actually, I'm not sure if it's important here, but it's at the very least an added bonus that white has an a pawn that queens on a light square, same as the bishop. So there's no black isn't going to have the option of swapping off into that kind of ending, a bishop and wrong color rook pawn ending versus king. So here, white's winning. Okay, what if black grabs this pawn? Well, here too he loses. Bishop takes f7, knight e5, and now h5 wins the game. So h takes g5, bishop takes h5, followed by the g-pawn running, and if knight takes f7, h takes g6, and there's no way for black's knight to cover the g8 square. So there's no e9 for him to go to, and h6 is covered by the g5 pawn. So black is just lost here. So after king to a4, the only move that holds the game is sitting and waiting with king to c5. Okay, so now king takes a5, and now black does have to move the knight. Knight f5, bishop f7, knight h4. But here, okay, so the difference was before, in this line with knight to f5 straight away. Bishop f7, knight h4, king b5. So we don't allow this. That was the point. So king c5, we cut off the b5 square. King a5, knight f5, bishop f7, knight h4. Say bishop to d5, threatening to trap the knight with bishop to e4, and also preventing black from playing knight f3 and liquidating white's kingside pawn. But still, black can hold. So knight to f5, say bishop to e4, and now knight to d4 is good. So bishop takes g6, knight f3, the pawn falls, and black holds without any problem. But still, it's worth making black prove it from, well, even in the end position, but certainly from back here. Okay, well, let's go back to the beginning of this ending again then, and see what black should have done instead. And again, this is a good exercise for you to try to figure out, what's the best way for black to proceed in this ending. Now, one try that might jump to mind immediately is knight to b4, which looks like it seems to just win a pawn, because if a3, well, then knight to d3 check does win a pawn, so we get this guy. But king to d2 is a nice resource. So the first point is if knight takes a2, bishop to d5, and this is probably well, it's certainly still better for black, but giving white his own majority to work with makes things a bit iffier. I mean, you don't want to give the bishop side counterplay, because if you end up in a situation where both sides are racing, where both sides have their own passers on opposite wings, all things being equal, that favors the bishop considerably because of its long-range powers. So black's knight is going to move a lot more slowly, and while white's bishop can both combat black's passers and help his own, it's harder for the black knight to do the same. One other point worth noticing here is that because white has a b-pawn, black doesn't even have a passer yet, and it's going to be still pretty difficult for him to make one. So knight takes a2 isn't really all that exciting, but then after c6, king c3, again, black's position is not quite as easy as we'd like it to be. So, excuse me, if he plays knight takes a2 check, well, this is just an immediate draw. King b3, knight c1's forced, king c2. If he goes to a2, we just go back to b3. If he goes to e2, king to d3. And if he goes to g1, then he's just trapping his knight and he'll lose it after king e3 and f4 and king f2. So he's got to go back to c1, king c2, and it's just a little merry-go-round here. Okay, well, knight to d5 check is maybe even worse, because white can grab now, and he regains the pawn, and his king is much better, so good chances that white's just winning here. Okay, so that leaves only a5, which is the best move, but still, okay, a3, knight a6, and black is having to spend quite a bit of time bringing his knight back into the game. So knight to b4 here in our starting position is rather too ambitious. Okay, so a better way to play is knight e7. So the knight's still going to go to d5 at some point. We're avoiding the exchange and preparing c6 or c5 and so on, but without giving white these free tempi kicking the knight. Alright, so let's say king e2, c6, king d3. Okay, king c7 is fine. a5 is a little finesse to prevent b4 for the moment. King d4, king c7. Okay, and if white tries to go forward with his king, he can't maintain it. So if king to c5, just b6 drives him back, obviously, and if king to e5, then knight to g6 drives him back, or at least drives him out of the way. If he goes to f5, black plays king d6, and he's happy. And then he can play knight to e7 check if he wants. Okay, so let's say f4, king d6. Alright, so now black's king is where it ought to be. Okay, so white has no little, no anchor points, no way to tie black down, and black is just going to carefully, slowly but surely, advance all of his guys. So here's one line. It's a little bit unusual in some respects, because black's going to end up putting quite a few pawns on light squares, but we'll see it really doesn't harm anything. Okay, so b3, knight c5. Okay, so we put the knight where we want. Maybe threatening to play knight to b4. So a3. Okay, g6. The point of this is that black is going to play, let's say, c5 and f5, and force the white king to the third rank. So it's a space grab. And of course, you always have to be careful about putting these pawns on light squares here, especially on the side where you don't have the majority. See, the reason it's not necessarily so bad for black to do it on the queen side is because he's got a majority there, and that means that he's got more force over there. And because he has more force over there, he can push those pawns to dark squares if he wants to. Alright, and in fact, the danger of pushing all these pawns to dark squares is that you might let the other guy get a light square blockade, as we saw in the game, in fact. So, no problem on the queen side. On the king side, you got to be a little more careful because there it can be blockaded, and since you don't have an advantage in force over there, then those pawns could be endangered. Okay, but here black has enough space. White really can't get in to bother the pawns, so it works out okay. All right, so g6. Let's say bishop to f3, b5, king d3, f5. All right, h4, threatening h5, so black plays h5 as well. Now, if the white bishop could somehow magically get to a8 or f7, e8 or f7, Okay, that would be a nuisance for black, but it's pretty difficult to see how exactly white's bishop is going to hop over all of these black forces and get there. So bishop to e2, and now black is going to aim for a very useful square. So knight f6, bishop f3. Okay, and now a further little trick. So he still wants to get to e4, but we'll do it like this. So knight to d7, and now the threat's to play knight to c5 check. The king has to go to c3 or c2, and then we can play knight to e4. Okay, so white tries king to d4. If he plays b4, black has a couple of good ways to go. He can either take on b4 and then play knight to b6 and knight to d5. That wouldn't be so bad. Or a4. Okay, and so on a4, bishop to e2, knight f6, threatening to go into e4 as we already mentioned, bishop f3, and now c5 is a winner. Alright, so black is breaking through on the queen side. You can see that white's bishop is not anywhere near black's kingside pawns, and in fact, the bishop is really tied down. I mean, if it even tried to go hunting things, black would play knight to e4, knight takes g3, and in fact, it's also nice to note that the knight on g3 protects. So let's say we get this here at some point. It protects f5 and h5. So even if white won the g6 pawn, it would just be a trade, and white would have nothing further to do. Okay, so anyway, after c5, black is clearly breaking through on the queen side, has no problems on the king side, and so it's a straightforward win. Okay, so going back to here, let's say king to d4 instead. Well now, knight to c5, b4, takes, and now, okay, black can just reload. He can play knight to e6 check and c5, that's all fine. But he can even play knight to e4. So takes, king takes, c5, and black's queenside passer, or about to be passer, is much faster than white's kingside soon to be passer. While if the white king goes back to deal with the b pawn, then black wins in basically chess 101 fashion by using the pawn as a decoy. So we don't push this guy. So we leave this guy where he is. So that way white has to waste as much time as possible going after him. So we just leave it there and immediately head over to white's kingside. And wins. Okay, so g5 if nothing else. It's not necessary, but it's certainly good enough. You just make sure that white's king can't turn the corner to get to f1 safely, and this wins. Alright, so that's just one sample. I mean, there are a number of ways in which you can do it, but the point is you centralize, you force the other side back a little bit at a time, while advancing your majority. Again, no hurries, no rush. You just make sure that everything is nice, everything's covered, and drive him back into the sea, and you win. Okay, so king to e1, knight e5. So let's look a little bit more at the game. Bishop to e4, c5, f4, knight c4, b3, knight d6. Okay, so we already discussed this. Yeah, so all the arrows here were, again, noting the point that black has kind of tied himself down by this commitment to the f7 pawn, to the pawn staying on f7, that is. Okay, so b5, king b2, king c7, king c3. Alright, so as we saw in the game, black played king to b6, and really, again, kind of gave himself such a narrow window with which to operate. So let's see what he should have done instead. Okay, well, again, we want the king on d6. We can't have the king on d6 as long as the knight's there, and we don't want to give up the f7 pawn. So let's play f6. See what bad things happen, if any bad thing happens. Okay, so king to d3, and now just knight f5. So everything's covered. King e4, knight to d4. So the white king can't get in. There's no way into f5 and g6. All right, let's say he plays bishop to f7, hoping to go into d5. Well, we take care of that. We play king to d6. So all the entrances are closed. Okay, g4. All right, here it's not forced, but a move like g5 isn't even so bad. So we don't even give him any space here. We're going to take over this spot. So this is, let's say, the black square approach. So before we saw from our initial position a winning approach where all the pawns were on light squares. Okay, here we can see maybe an approach where the pawns are on dark squares. We'll see if this works okay too. Okay, so f takes g5, f g5, bishop g8. Okay, so now we need to do something. And here black has to use some tricks. Okay, so knight to c6, and if king to f5, knight to e7 check, and we win the bishop. So that's good for us. All right, h3. Now knight to b4. And one thing to note maybe about this situation is that if white goes rushing for the kingside pawns, the black king could trail it in and try to lock him in with the king on f6. Now that way's a bit more risky because white can maybe play h4. So got to be a little bit careful about that. So so the line I have goes with a3 here, but maybe I should take more seriously this possibility. See what happens. Okay, so knight takes a2, king g6. All right, and now okay, I kind of want to play. Well, there are at least 3 plans here for black. So I want us to play king e5, king f4, which is better than going to f6 because after h4, gh, g5 won't be check. So yeah, I like this better. So king e5. King h6. The other plan I was going to say is bring the king to f8, and the third plan is to just ignore the king side and rush the queen side as fast as possible. But let's try this first. So king h6, king f4. All right, and now, okay, if h4, gh, g5. Maybe white should play bishop to d5 first. So let's see what happens on knight to c3. Okay, so now g6, h3, g7, h2, bishop d5, knight takes d5, queens, queens. Can even make a rook, so we can be smart alecky here. And white king goes there, we check, and obviously that's a simple win for black doing just about anything legal. Okay, so going back. White should try bishop to d5. Oh, we can't play bishop to d5 first because we're going to take the g pawn. So that was quite simple. Okay, so this is a winning approach for white. Okay, the other thing we can try is maybe bishop to d5 here. But it's hard to believe that such a slow-moving plan could have a chance. So let's say knight to c3. All right, and we've got to keep the bishop on the diagonal, so bishop to c6. And now c4. Okay, b takes c4, b4. And it's now impossible for white's bishop to stop black's pawn from queening. So this is also a winner. Okay, so it was worth looking at that, and we saw that it doesn't succeed. So a3, knight c6. Again, king f5 is met by knight to e7 check. So bishop to f7, knight to d8, bishop g8, knight e6. Okay, king f5, knight f4. So it's still not easy for him to get in. Okay, now if he tries this h4 trick, all right, then knight to d5 is a winner. So takes. Okay, if he takes everything off, c4, and again, black is too fast, as you can easily verify for yourself. Black's pawn is already one square further than white's, and white also has to waste a move getting his king out of the way, so it's not even close. Okay, if h takes g5, knight e7, king e4, knight g8, gh, knight h6, g5, knight to g8 is winning as well. So, h4 doesn't work. And if he plays king f6, just knight h3, and it's going to take white a long time to win the black g-pawn, if he ever does it. So he has to get his bishop to g2 somehow, and it's kind of tough to see how that's going to happen. I mean, in fact, it's... Okay, so he has to play like bishop to h7, bishop to e4, bishop g2. Meanwhile, black's c-pawn is running far too quickly, so this is an easy win for black. Alright, so here we saw that white can cause some inconvenience. I mean, black has to find some tricky moves if he wants to make progress, but still, this is the way to go. Alright, so it wasn't quite as easy as what we had at the beginning, and in part it's because black had to do some backtracking. And also maybe g5 is maybe double-edged, so I think it's probably okay. I don't think g5 is so bad. But, yeah, the fact that black has to backtrack a bit, he's wasting some time. It's not as easy as it could have been. Okay, so in the game, there's one other thing that I wanted to mention. Right, okay, so anyway, here, black could play g5 here, he could have played f6 here, so he's just resolutely ignoring this. Alright, and so then here, finally, okay, so here's where he played h takes g5, and after this, I doubt there's a win. I think there's still some interesting lines, but really, black's chances are as slim as possible in this position. So there are a couple of other interesting ideas, though. So one is to play a4, and there's a really remarkable move for white here, remarkable idea. See if you can figure out what white to move ought to do. Maybe he doesn't have to do it, but it's pretty interesting. Okay, well, the move is... Okay, well, first of all, before I say what the move is, let me maybe suggest what black's idea is. So black would perhaps like to play either a3 or a takes b3, and then maybe play the the c4 idea as in the game. And without white having this extra a pawn, it could be... Maybe black will still have some very small winning chances there. All right, but white's idea here is kind of neat. So it's bishop to c4 check. So black can go to a5, and white can maybe just play bishop back to d5 again and ask him if he's made any progress. But the really cute trap is that if knight takes c4, black actually... So first when I was looking at this, I thought, okay, well, this is maybe a draw, bc4, king a5, king c2, and maybe I count the tempi, and maybe white can hold on and lock black out. But in fact, white plays b takes a4 check, and black loses because, well, king a4, king c4, and white's king is going to get to the king side before black's does, so he wins. So knight takes c4. It's kind of funny. Expect b takes c4. Nope. B takes a4, and black's a goner. So here I think black should just play f6. And after f6, he can hold. Well, obviously he can hold, but I mean maybe he still has some winning chances here, but not in the game. All right. Well, I hope this was instructive. I think we should keep the other game for a separate show. I mean, there's a lot to discuss there as well, and it doesn't really dovetail with what we've looked at here. So I hope you've maybe gotten a little bit more understanding of bishop versus knight endings, and in particular, I hope you got maybe 2 or 3 things from this game. So one is that, well, again, in addition to, let's say, some particular ideas about bishop versus knight endings, I hope that you've maybe thought about and internalized to some extent this idea of, let's say, overcommitting to a certain structure. So let's see. So back to this position here. So black, again, became really inflexible. So he was afraid of pushing the f-pawn, or perhaps just didn't really think about it. You know, maybe he just didn't realize that it would be important to do so. So, okay, the pawn's on f7 is protected by the knight, and as a result, I mean, he really narrowed the pipe through which his pieces the piping through which his pieces could flow. So be aware of that. I mean, if there are things that you need to do to achieve your aims in the position, don't allow one piece's placement to just knock out your plan. I mean, you can move your pieces. You don't have to just leave them there forever. So be aware of that, and try not to be too inflexible in that respect. Okay, certainly a positional error that should be recognized here. H takes g5 was just a very bad move because it gave white the threat of this outside passed pawn, and then that forced this further commitment with g6, after which it's really, really difficult for black to kind of unravel his guys. So he'd have to bring the king back to e7 maybe to try to win. Okay. So anyway, hopefully this is useful. Oh, one other idea I think too that could be valuable is this idea, okay, in the bishop versus knight ending, let me go to this line, of realizing that you don't always have to be afraid of putting pawns on light squares. You have to be careful about it, you have to be thoughtful about it, but it's not necessarily the end of the world. So you have to keep in mind 2 things. So first of all, if you're doing it on the majority side, that's often even better. So it's often the right way to do it. If you have opposite bishops, for example, so let's say black doesn't have a knight on d5, but let's say he has a bishop on f6 instead. Okay, well, in those situations, you always push the majority pawns to light squares, because if you push them on dark squares, let's say the pawns are on a5, b6, and c5, well, then white plays pawn to a4, puts his king on c4, and that's it forever. I mean, the pawns are not going to move anymore for black. So you advance where you've got the majority. Certainly in opposite color bishop situations, you advance to the opposite color of your bishop, and really the opposite color. I'm sorry, yeah. You move them first to the same color as the opponent's bishop, And the reason is so that way you don't allow some kind of blockade. So if your pawns are all in dark squares, white can create a light squared blockade. All right, well, even though you've got a knight, that can still be a useful rule of thumb. Now, on the side where you don't have a majority, you have to be more careful. All right, here the reason why black arranges the pawns in that way is just to grab space. So it doesn't allow white's king to stick around in the center, and in fact it's restricting the white bishop too. And, in this case with the knight, it may not be the same if it was a light squared bishop situation, but with the knight, there's always the possibility of the knight getting to a square like e4, where it can pick off the g3 pawn. So even there you can do it. That one requires more caution, but it's possible in that situation as well. Okay, so I think there's quite a bit here that's of instructional value, and I hope you did learn something out of it. And certainly I think the more you analyze it on your own, the more you'll benefit as well. So thank you very much, and I will see you next time, perhaps with the other game that I was referring to. So take care. Bye-bye.